Mr. Schiff and his colleagues repeatedly told you that the intelligence community assessment that Russia was acting alone, responsible for the election interference, implying that this somehow debunked the idea that there might be, interference from other countries, including Ukraine. Mr. Nadler deployed a similar argument, saying that President Trump thought, quote, Ukraine, not Russia, interfered in our last presidential election. And this is basically what we call a straw man argument. Let me be clear. The House managers, in over a 23-hour period, kept pushing this false dichotomy that it was either Russia or Ukraine, but not both.
And again, forgive the looking glass. That's basically what we call a false flag argument. The whiff, the notion that these Russian talking points could be correct, and it was Ukraine that meddled in our election. Here is Lindsey Graham from just this past Thursday on this very point.
The president believes that the Ukraine interfered in our election. I can tell you without any doubt, it was the Russians who hacked into the DNC. It was not the Ukrainians.
With us to hopefully shed some light on the truth here is Senator Angus King, independent of the great state of Maine, who caucuses with the Democrats. Senator, how do you keep true north on your compass? How do you remind yourself what's true and what's through the looking glass?
Well, I'll make a general point and then talk about the question about who interfered in the election. The general point is that this morning I was making notes. We were getting a lot of discussion of the trees, but not of the forest, not of the basic shape of the case against the president. Talking about he talked all around the transcript, but didn't talk about the fact that the first words out of the president's mouth after the president of Ukraine said we need those javelins was, I'd like you to do us a favor, though. And I don't think there's been enough evidence on the word, enough emphasis on the word, though. That's a word that means, that involves an exchange. I'd like you to go to the store. I'll go if you give me the money, though. I mean, that's what that meant. And then the next words out of the president's mouth were CrowdStrike and the Ukrainian theory, which, by the way, I serve on the Intelligence Committee. I've been at hearings, briefings, seen classified data for 3 years now on this. I've never seen a whiff, a scintilla, any evidence at all that Ukraine interfered in our elections in any kind of systematic way. What they're really talking about is there were Ukrainian politicians who wrote op-eds opposing Donald Trump. The reason they did was that he appeared to sanction the Russian annexation of Crimea, which is a dagger to the heart of the Ukrainian people. So, yes, there were Ukrainians who didn't like Donald Trump, but they didn't like him publicly because of some of the things that he said during the campaign. There's no evidence that they did any hacking. Lindsey Graham and I don't always agree, but he's got that one right.
Senator, let's talk about umbrage. I have to ask you about umbrage because last night several Republicans took umbrage at Adam Schiff raising a CBS News report based on a blind quote from an administration official that heads would be on pikes if they went against the president. I have to say, for clarity, part of the umbrage was from your across-the-aisle colleague from the great state of Maine. Are they doing this to envelop, to insulate a no vote, saying it's because you angered us, you offended us?
I can't speak to motivation. I found it kind of astonishing. I mean, right after the midterms, the day after the midterms, President Trump said, I'm going to quote pretty much exactly, I retired Jeff Flake. It was me and me alone. Well, if that isn't an indication that this president feels that he can, in fact, take out senators, I don't know what is. He did the same thing, asked Mark Sanford about that in his House race in South Carolina. So the idea that if a Republican senator voted against the president, they'd be in some trouble, I think is sort of self-evident. Act 3, Scene 2 of the of Hamlet, he says, "Methinks the lady doth protest too much." Now, I'm not talking about any particular lady. That's just the line from Hamlet. But I think they're protesting too much, something that's pretty clear to everybody.
Well, Senator, it's Chris Matthews. Thank you, Senator. It seems to me there's a couple points here in this sort of pincer movement to get these Republicans to stay in line. One is the motive that you mentioned, which is fear. The other one is try to give them something to hang their hat on. I remember a National Enquirer cover years ago with a picture of Jack Kennedy sort of standing behind a curtain. You could see him, though. He's standing in the window, somewhat covered by the curtain, and he had been dusted over like in a high school play to look older. And it said, "John Kennedy is alive in Poland." Now, you would ask a Republican today, is it plausible or even possible that Ukraine did the dirty work in 2016? Are they just giving them something that they could say was possible or plausible? Do you think any of your colleagues believe that Ukraine has a server over there from the DNC? They have physically gotten the server, and it's in Poland in Ukraine somewhere. Do you think they believe that, or they simply have a talking point here?
I doubt it. I'd be surprised. I mean, if Lindsey Graham said what he said, I suspect most of his colleagues feel the same way. Anybody that's looked into this knows that it's nonsense. But that's really, I don't know. I can't. There's been a lot of talk about mind reading. I can't mind read my colleagues, but they had to say that. They have to raise that issue because the president in the call. And by the way, I agree with everybody that you've got to read the transcript. The president in the call didn't mention the word corruption. He didn't talk about corruption generally. He didn't talk about corruption of the former president or anybody else. He talked about CrowdStrike. That's right. 2016. And he talked about the Bidens. That's all he talked about. He didn't talk about corruption. And that's the sort of, I hesitate to say when we're talking about parties here, but that's the elephant in the room.
Well, one thing I've noticed in all the hearings, and everybody here has watched everything from the House hearings to the Senate hearings, the trial itself, we've never heard a character witness for the president. We've never heard someone say, he's a good guy, or he wouldn't do something like this. Nobody has ever said do you ever hear that in any conversations with the Republicans? Does anyone speak up and say, you really don't know Donald Trump, he's a good man? Has anybody ever said that to you?
I don't know if anyone's ever said that, but I do think you raise an important point because and I've jotted it down in my notes, one of the points, I think it was Jay Sekulow, said nobody whose testimony we've heard spoke directly to the president. Remember that?
Yeah.
Nobody spoke directly to the president. Well, okay, so let's hear from the people who did.
Yeah.
I mean, this thing could be solved in 15 minutes. And by the way, I don't know what John Bolton would say. I don't know what Mick Mulvaney would say. But the fact that they're moving mountains and really pushing on the Republicans to not allow those witnesses, in the law, there's a concept called adverse inference. If somebody's keeping evidence away from you, you can draw an inference that it wouldn't be helpful to them.
Well, we don't have to do much inferring here, Senator, because we know that John Bolton called it a drug deal. And we know that Mick Mulvaney said, hey, move on. This is what we do in politics. We hold people up. We squeeze them. I mean, they basically have already testified, but not in the trial.
That's right, and they're out there, but I think, if they came forward, and by the way, I have to say, I was happy last night to hear Adam Schiff talk about Article 2, which is the obstruction. I don't know if I should say this, but I think that's the more serious of the two matters here, because the first one is a specific transaction. It was wrong. It appears it was wrong anyway. We may hear more evidence next week that will change my mind on that. But the obstruction is utterly clear. They didn't allow a single document, a single witness. And my worry is if he's absolved on that point, that will be the largest transfer of power from the Congress to the executive in the history of this country. Because not only will impeachment be a dead letter, but I don't know how you do oversight of executive agencies if the president is empowered and the Congress has said, if they acquit him on Article 2, that it's okay to just stiff-arm Congress. You want to investigate how we ran the Fast and Furious program? Forget it. We're not going to give you anything. You don't like the decision we made on whatever it is. I mean, do they really want to give future presidents, because someday there will be a president of the other party, whether it'll be this time or the next time or the next time, but do they really want to give future presidents that amount of power? The shocking thing to me is the way Congress in this situation is absolutely abdicating its own authority. The framers thought our institutional loyalty and sort of jealousy and rivalry we'd hold each other in check. In this case, Congress is rolling over and handing, as I said, the most power to the president, I think, in one shot that we've ever seen in our history.
Senator Angus King, independent of the state of Maine. Senator, thank you for taking all of our questions again today.
Yes.
We greatly appreciate your time.